Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Daniel Samuels. I am the Public Programs Manager for the National Museum of American Jewish History, located on historic Independence Mall, Independence Mall in Philadelphia, PA. Yeah, I'm very excited for today's program, and I should tell you that part of our mission, the National Museum of American Jewish History, or NAMAJ, as we call ourselves, is to connect Jews more closely to their heritage and to inspire people of all backgrounds with a greater appreciation for the diversity of the American Jewish experience, as well as the freedoms to which Americans aspire. And for those of you who have tuned into our programs before, first of all, welcome. You know that I always get a little extra excited when I get to introduce programs which do pretty much exactly what our mission sets out to accomplish. And so if you haven't noticed the excitement in my voice or the nervousness, I'll just tell you that today is one of those days. Like most of NAMAJ's current programs, today's is being offered to you free of charge. So I'd like to invite you to support the museum if you're able to, so we can continue to bring you programs such as this. The suggested donation for today's program is $10, and you can do that fairly easily by following the link posted in the either chat if you're on Zoom or comments on Facebook. And as an attendee of today's program, you can take advantage of a special 10% discount at our museum store, which is good through this Friday, February 19th. If you type in Silver 17, SILVER 17, at checkout, you can receive that 10% discount. And special shout out and thanks to our museum members for continued support. You can add that to your normal discount and make it 20%. So that said, let's get to the content. Today's program, Jews and the Music of the Maghreb, featuring Chris Silver, will feature, as I said, Chris Silver, who is the Siegel Family Assistant Professor in Jewish History and Culture at McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Chris will be offering a presentation which introduces us to the large role which Jewish people played in the music scene of the early 20th century Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, the region we call together the Maghreb. He's also the founder of Gramophone, which I will pronounce that way, a record label dedicated to preserving North Africa's Jewish musical past, one record at a time. As the founder of that record label and as a historian, he draws upon, or will draw upon, a really amazing personal collection of recordings, not to mention historical knowledge, and he'll give us a really wonderful, vivid look and listen into the region's cultural history. I'll just say again on a personal note, I started reading some of Chris's articles just a few months ago, listening to some of these recordings, and just found it to be so very interesting. So I am really excited to have him at the museum or at the virtual museum as on a program. Excuse me. I did ask him to bring the intro class, the 101, so to speak. So you know, for the experts coming here on the subject, hopefully you'll pick up some more and you'll enjoy the program. For the newbies like me, there's a lot to take in, and I really hope you enjoy. I'll note that you can submit questions if you're on Zoom via the Q&A and in the Facebook comments at any time. We'll try and sort of aggregate those and take them at the end. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our guest, Chris Silver. Hey, Chris.
Hello. Good to see you.
How you doing? Good to see you. I'm
well. Thanks for
so happy to have you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you know, it's been an exciting couple of months, you know, going back and forth with you, and you know, I've been on other programming conversations with other potential guests, and they've all at least heard of you, number one, and those who have heard of you are really excited about the work you're doing.
That's great. That's great. Wonderful to hear, and I'm happy to be here with you, and I'm glad that the National Museum of American Jewish History is investing in programming like this and programming on this very subject. So like you said, I'm going to present a 101 today, but also hopefully offer something for those who are either of these traditions, know the music well, or have studied them in the past, and you know, I hope it's to everyone's liking.
Well, I've got my notepad ready. I'm ready to learn, and I'm giddy and not adding anything here. So I'm just going to hop off screen and let you do your thing. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, wonderful. So now I'm going to do that awkward thing that has now been immortalized in a classic TikTok video, where I'm going to share my screen with all of you. So give me a second while I do that, and then we'll get started. I think we're ready to go. Dan, Emily, can I just get verification that all can be seen? Okay, looks good, looks great. Okay, so thanks to everyone again for being here. I can't see you or hear you, but I can feel your support, and so I'm very appreciative as I talk to myself for the next 40 or so minutes. So let me start with some overview before we get to the music itself, and really what I'm going to try and do, given that this music is so incredible, is to let it speak for itself. So I'm going to sort of introduce every record we're gonna hear, but I'm gonna try and in some way sort of put myself to the background as much as possible. So, you know, the region we're thinking about today is Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, which you can see here in part on this map. And you know, we're going to be listening to some of the voices of, actually in some cases going back to the 19th century, but some of the voices that populated that geography in the first half of the 20th century. And thinking about the outsized role played by indigenous Arabophone Arabic-speaking Jewish music makers in North Africa, also known as the Maghreb. Again, in that period, sort of the birth of the recording industry through mid 20th century when new technologies emerged. So all of that to say, you know, we can also think about this moment, the first half of the 20th century, in different ways, right? So we could think about it in sort of political terms, but we could also think about it in technological terms as well. So we might think about this as sort of the heyday of the 78 RPM era. So this was the era when the dominant musical technology was the shellac record that spun at 78 rotations per minute, and all of the clips all of the sound clips we're listening to today were released on 78 and come from this era. And so we're talking about discs that some of you are familiar with. Some of you may have no idea what I'm talking about, but you're about to learn. So in general, about 10 inches or 25 centimeters in diameter, and in general holding about 3 minutes of music per side. So this is sort of where we get that standardization of the 3-minute pop song, is thanks to the technological medium. I'm gonna present just a few records today, but I should say there are many more where that came from. And you know, I was lucky enough, I was fortunate enough to happen on some of these records back in 2008, and so I've been collecting them for 13 years now. My collection has grown to hundreds now, and what's remarkable about that is the fact that what that represents, that number of some hundreds, is really only a fraction of the total output of this era. So there's much more out there yet to be discovered, and it should also give you a sense of sort of the significance of music and the music industry. So hundreds, thousands of individual titles, and then of course individual records, in some cases sold in the thousands, tens of thousands. And so we're talking about the circulation of hundreds of thousands of records in North Africa in the first half of the 20th century, a considerable number indeed. Why do I collect? What I'm interested in is a couple of things. As best I can, I'm interested in getting this music back out there. What we might think about as sort of repatriating these sounds, putting them on the internet so that descendants of musicians, the communities for whom this music belongs to, can enjoy this music, learn from this music again, and all of that to say that the driving force behind all of this is to amplify voices, the voices contained on these records. What this music might offer us as we're listening to it, beyond enjoyment, that sort of emotional ecstasy that comes with listening to music, which is also important, especially at this moment in time, is a few things. To begin with, it provides us with an Arabic language source base for the study of North African Jews. So often, oops, I got distracted by the chat, as usual. So often we sort of approach the history of North African Jews through a French language source base, and there's a logic to that. But here's the possibility of listening to North Africa's Jewish past through its Arabic sound. So it provides us with insights into Jewish life, the imbricated nature of the Jewish-Muslim relationship, which we can think about throughout the presentation, of Jews and nationalism in North Africa, Moroccan, Algeria, and Tunisia, not something we tend to associate with Jews in North Africa, but something that certainly comes out in the music. We can get a sense of what major global and of course local and regional events sounded like. So we're going to hear one record that dealt with the Second World War. And then finally thinking about sort of what sounds populated the post-war era, so post-World War II, and what that might tell us. So what we're going to hear over the next few minutes are the voices of stars, superstars in some cases, as well as lesser known figures. But I think the point to keep in mind here is that all of this music meant a great deal to those who sought it out and those who were listening to it. We're going to start by listening to some selections of Andalusian music. And so, what I'm talking about here is both instrumental and vocal pieces, song texts, sung poetry to a certain extent, that traces its origins back to medieval Islamic Spain or Al-Andalus. And so it's going to have a very different cadence from some of the music that we're going to hear later in the program, the much more popular music that's taking from the Andalusian repertoire, but also adding to it sort of all manner of musical styles, as well as multiple languages, so not just Arabic, but French, and we're going to hear some Spanish as well. And then finally, we're going to conclude with a piece of liturgical music, Hebrew language music, Adon Olam. And I should say that most of the recorded output by North African Jews in the first half of the 20th century was of this either Andalusian music or popular music, but most of it was in Arabic, and a decided minority was in Hebrew, liturgical or paraliturgical. The last thing I want to mention in this long windup before we get started is that what you're going to hear are mostly sort of unadorned transfers from the original discs, not from the masters, but those that come from my collection. So what you're gonna pick up on is that many of these discs were quite well loved, meaning that they were played again and again and again, sometimes wearing out the grooves. And so you'll hear that. I've done my best to select pieces where that isn't too overwhelming, but you'll hear some imperfections nonetheless. And to also point out, that this music, it traveled around the world. I mean, the very fact that it arrived at my various doorsteps over the last decade plus means that it traveled extensively and it survived somehow, which is incredible. So I want you to keep that in mind as we listen to this music, because from every vantage point, it shouldn't have survived. It shouldn't have survived war, displacement, the extensive travel, considering that these are 10-inch brittle, fragile, heavy discs, but survive it did, and we're going to listen to some of those remnants now. So we'll get started. Let me just make sure that there's no notes for me. Okay, feels like I'm in class. So we're going to start, like I said, with a piece of Andalusian music, an instrumental piece. This is a Bashraf Kabir. This is an opening to one of the Andalusian musical suites of Malouf, of the Tunisian and Eastern Algerian musical tradition. This, as you can see, was released on the Al Hassan label, and it was released in the early 1930s. And so this was one of the first independent labels in Tunisia. A couple of things about the artists who are featured here. For those who can read the Arabic, you can see the first person mentioned is Albert Abitbol. Albert Abitbol was one of the foremost Tunisian violinists of the first half of the 20th century, of Moroccan origin. And the other figure featured here is Gaston Bshiri, who you can see at right. He was born in Tunis at the end of the 19th century, 1888, likely of Izmirli origins, or origins in Ottoman Izmir. He was many things: a record store owner, a music and Hebrew teacher, an accomplished oudist, and of course a recording artist of renown. His story, moves out of North Africa and into the North African diaspora in the 1930s. He, like some other artists that we'll discuss, will establish himself in Paris in the interwar period, which means that a number of these figures will suffer the fate of their European co-religionists in the course of the Second World War and the Holocaust. And Bshiri is one of those victims. And so Bshiri is murdered in Auschwitz on April 8th, 1942. And I say that to sort of put that in context, again, sort of the lives of these individuals, the very real lives of these individuals, but also, again, to sort of emphasize how incredible it is that this music survived in the first place. We're going to hear a spoken introduction, by the way, at the beginning. We're going to hear that in some of the other pieces as well. So you're going to hear the announcement of the label name. In this case, as you can see from the label itself, you're actually going to hear the chirping of birds before the music gets started.
اسطوانات أم الحسن الأستاذ غاستون بسيري والأستاذ ألبير أبيتبول.
The next piece of music we're gonna listen to is this one here, recorded by Eli Touboul, who also went by the name of Pinhas El Saidi. That's because he, while born in the town of Mostaghanem in western Algeria, in fact had origins in another town by the name of Saida. Born at the end of the 19th century as well, 1894. He would die in 1947. He recorded both before the Second World War and after as well. In 1928, he recorded about 10 discs for the Columbia label, which recorded extensively in North Africa, including this piece, which we can translate as something along the lines of, "Oh, cupbearer, serve my beloved." Cupbearer, the person who sort of serves the wine, is a theme that is common to the Andalusi repertoire, and we're going to hear another song with cupbearer in its title in just a second. We can say a number of things about Eli Touboul. The first was that he was much in demand among Jews and Muslims in interwar Mostaghanem and interwar Algeria. And that at the end of his career, we see that he has a couple names here. At the end of his career, when he finally recorded a few discs for the Odeon label, he would settle on a single name that sort of captured his essence, and that there was sort of no one else like him, and that was the name of Sheikh Pinhas. So he had reached the level of being a sheikh, of being a master of Andalusian music. So we'll take a listen to that now.
حبيبي ويا لا 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 ويا ساقي وسقي حبيبي ويا لا 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 وصاحب الخد الماء والرد يا لا 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 وصاحب الخد الماء والرد يا لا 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 شربك يا لا 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 وطال شربي لندا شربك يا لا لا.
Okay, so here's another Andalusian part of the Andalusian repertoire. This by an artist who was often just known simply as Sassi, born in Algeria in 1885. He, like many of these artists, was many things. He was a shoemaker by trade. He was an entrepreneur who operated a lively cafe in Algiers during the interwar period. And he was also known as the greatest North African mandolinist of the 20th century, and indeed sometimes referred to as the seal of the mandolinists, very much invoking sort of the last of the great artists. He began recording as late as 1912, possibly earlier as well, and he died in 1971. And here's another piece of Andalusian music invoking the role of the cupbearer.
أول بغيت تطوي صفرة من كيوس المدام وأنا بلا كيوس سقيني عمر مراشفك ومضيني والريق من الرحيق يكفيني كاس الرحيق طاير كاس الرحيق طاير عقلي حاير معاك طاير نبغي رشفاتو ما نشرب حتى تردني من المرشف سكران أسقي باقي نور شمعنا ما قرب حسكاتو ما بتنهدى شحال ما غدرنا كيسان ما بتنهدى شحال ما غدرنا كيسان وهذا نهارنا جوزناها على التمام شمس الغروب مالت صفرا وانت ما شبعت بنظرة وما زلت ما نسيت الحضرة ليل الفراق تاغي ليل الفراق طاغي باقي ساغي على اللاغي نبغي لغات.
We're moving now from some Andalusian pieces to more popular pieces, but I think you'll hear some of the synergy sort of as we transition and move forward in the 20th century. And so now we're going to hear a piece written by, I saw somewhere in one of the comments, are Jews writing these pieces as well. So we're going to listen to a piece that was written by this figure here, a towering figure, usually associated with Andalusian music, who went by the recording name of Saoud Oranais, or Saoud from Oran in Western Algeria. He's born also at the end of the 19th century, born in 1886 in Oran. This is a song that's it's a special one. It's a song dedicated to his hometown soccer team, La Union Sportive Musulmane d'Oran, USMO, the Muslim Sporting Union of Oran. He records this piece, writes and records this piece after his local soccer club wins the regional championship, and this is recorded in 1934. And what's special about this is many things, but also the fact that this is very much a soccer-loving region, and so this is likely the first instance of recorded soccer song from North Africa, and this comes to us from 1934.
اسطوانات بوليفون الشيخ سعود الوهراني. خلوني نفرح ونغني خلوني نفرح ونغني خلوني نفرح ونغني على لزمو شافيات طراني. زاهي وانا نشرب الكاس مع اصحاب العيس مو يا ناس شيعتها ما يلها قياس في ورا نواف البلداني. خلوني نفرح ونغني خلوني نفرح ونغني خلوني نفرح ونغني على لزمو شافيات طراني.
Okay. We're moving forward in our sort of exploration, our quick exploration of the popular realm, and there's no better figure than to illustrate sort of what this was about than Habiba Masika, who you can see at left here. Her story is at once incredible and then at the same time ultimately incredibly tragic. She's born in 1903, already a known entity by 1918. So as a teenager, becomes anointed a superstar of North Africa in the 1920s, a diva. You can see her look as well is very much of the 20s, of the roaring 20s, a flapper, a Tunisian flapper, and she meets a tragic death at the hands of a male fan who kills her in 1930. So she's she's very evocative of a much older story as well. The recording we have here is not just sort of popular or sort of moving out of the Andalusian realm, but we can point to this as a recording of Arab nationalist music. So this is a song recorded about Syria and the Great Syrian Uprising against the French just a few years earlier. Masika records this and some of her other quite subversive discs far from the seat of French power. She records this one in Berlin for the Beidephone label, which is a Beirut-born but Berlin-based label. This record, as will the others of Masika, will cause considerable problems for the French authorities in the 1930s, as Masika increasingly, even after her death, very much gives voice to a growing anti-colonial nationalism then emerging across North Africa. One last thing I should point out is that the trajectory of this record is rather remarkable as well. So, recorded in Berlin in 1928, purchased thereafter in Greater Syria. It ends up in Detroit, as you can see here, before making its way to someone in Kansas, who then sold it to me in New York, and now of course it lives in Montreal. So we're going to listen to the subversive sounds of Habiba Masika now.
اسطوانات بايدافون الست حبيبة مسيكا أنت سورية بلادي.
سورية وقلبي صلة باتت غرامة وطني روحي فداه لك من كل ظلامة وطني روحي فداه لك من كل ظلامة.
So for those who could pick up the Arabic, of course, there's lots of evocative language there about watani, wataniya, shahama, about pride in the Arab nation as well. And so again, this is worth considering, and of course, refocuses our attention on this aspect of North African Jewish history. To give you a sense of sort of the stature of Masika, a superstar in North Africa, whose music was also enjoyed in the Middle East, whose music, of course, was transported to places like the United States, as well, as you saw from that disc, and whose death really affected the population of North Africa. And so, by my count, something along the lines of 10 records were recorded immediately after her death, end of 1930, 1931, 1932, on the subject of her death. So, not only were her records selling in the thousands, but those about her tragic end were selling in the thousands as well. So one of those records, as you can see here, is appropriately titled Maut Habiba Masika, the death of Habiba Masika. And this was recorded by Tunisian Jewish vocalist, as well as you can see in this image here, someone who was regarded as the best interwar dancer in North Africa. And Flifla also was a star of the first Tunisian talkie in the 1930s as well. So we're just going to get a sense of sort of the lament, the anguish that came with the death of Habiba Masika.
اسطوانات جراموفون فليفلة.
اللي جرت لي انا حبيبه ده شايبك كل حجار كنت اسهر الليالي ونفرح جميع الاهالي ان كان في خير ولا زوالي عمره ما شافوا مني غيار
We're staying in the realm of, the popular meaning, in some ways sort of meaning, of much more recent vintage. We know who wrote it, sort of a different understanding of popular, but we'll get to sort of maybe the sense that that some of us are thinking about as well. We come with a really, here is a really fascinating record. This is one recorded by Lili Boniche, an Algerian Jew born in 1922 in the Kasbah of Algiers. He was an apprentice to Saoud Lorraine, who we heard singing about soccer a few records back. Really an up-and-coming star at the end of the interwar period, at the end of the 1930s. He joins the premier orchestra of Algeria, Andalusian Orchestra of Algeria, El Mutarabia. But World War II and the Vichy racial laws that are implemented will certainly put a hold on his career, as it will for other Jewish artists in North Africa at the time. This is a song that he recorded after the war, called Marché Noir, or the Black Market, and where he sings in a mix of Arabic and French about the difficulties of the war years in Algeria. So it's, in some ways a unique document because we haven't heard all of these recordings, but in other ways it's part of a much larger genre. There's a few things to point out here. One, we can hear a sort of a mimic of American English at the beginning of the recording, where he's talking about some young Algerian Jews who are turning to American soldiers stationed there, and you're going to hear him say, "Give me money." So this is sort of an approximation of that period. And then finally, the last lines you're going to hear him say again in a mix of Algerian Arabic and French. Now that goods are available, the situation is settled, thank God. We can tell our sons and daughters the story of the black market. Oops. Hold on 1 second, I'm trying to move something else. Okay.
ربيكا راشيل وموني يقولوا غير جيب ميموني ولا ما شراتش بورتموني رجعت تحسب المليار اي 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 سوبر شنوار اي 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 الكي يوم ما تيسوار اشحال كسروا الشطحات غير اللي تمشي خطوات فوق لاسان ترجع بدات خرجت من الكونسيرفاتوار اي 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 سمبر شنوا اي 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 يوم ما تايسوا السلعة راهي جات غاسة دي والدعوة فرات نحكي والولاد والبنات cette histoire du marché noir aïe 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 le marché noir aïe 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 nous crions matin et soir.
So I'm cognizant of the time as well, because I want to leave some time for questions. So I may skip the record after this so that we can try and finish as close to on time as possible. And I want to now give you a glimpse of a towering figure of North African music, Salim Halali, born in Annaba and Bon in eastern Algeria in 1920. His story also intersects with World War II, as does Gaston Bshiri's, as does Saoudo Ghane, who perished at Sobibor. But unlike the other two mentioned, Halali indeed survives the war, and he survives the war in Paris. So he had established himself in Paris in the 1930s, and he somehow survives the Holocaust while there. And it seems that he did so by being sheltered by the Grand Mosque there, and there are a number of films related to the subject and books as well that I can direct you to afterward. He, like I said, begins his career before the war, certainly continues it afterward. He's described after the war as the, quote, greatest Arab male voice of the post-war era. And what I find interesting or of interest about this recording in particular is if you can see here on the disc itself, we see that the words were written by Gaston Bshiri, the individual we heard from at the beginning, who perished in Auschwitz. And so they were together in Paris at the same time. And so this is sort of a question in my mind, sort of how does Halali come to the words of Bshiri? Is this an homage to Bshiri post-war? This is a disc that's recorded after Halali comes out of hiding in 1945. So there's lots of questions, and it's quite evocative. And we're going to hear Halali here with this great voice performing a tango.
اسطوانات فات سليم هلالي الحبيب نهدي عمري واللي يطلب كله ليه هو عمري هو بصري يا عيني عين عليه الحبيب انا نهدي له عمري واللي يطلب كله ليه واللي يطلب كله ليه يطلب كله ليه.
So this we'll have to say for the follow-up, but just we can marvel at the visage of Louisa Tunisia for a moment, and again I can direct people to where you can find some of this music at the end. So we're going to skip it, unfortunately, but there's still a couple more great sounds that we can hear. So Sami al-Maghribi, one of my favorites, one of the great voices of Morocco and North Africa more generally, born in the coastal city of Safi in Morocco in 1922. He ended up in the 1960s as a khazan, as a cantor here in Montreal, and I'm very fortunate to live just a few blocks from his daughter, in fact, and which has been just a tremendous, tremendous for me in so many ways. His career is really marked by, in some ways, sort of the improbable years of, or what sometimes we might think of as the improbable years of 1948, which is when he begins recording for Pate in Morocco, and then 1956, which is the year of Moroccan independence. So I want to play two pieces of him before we finish to get a sense of sort of the popular wave that he rode that really made his career at the beginning, and then some of the nationalist music that he pioneered and really provided the soundtrack for that Moroccan march to independence in the mid-1950s. So some of you may know this song in other contexts. This is Luna Lunera, a Cuban piece of Cuban music written by Tony Fergo. Sami al-Maghribi translated it into Arabic and in fact kept some of the Spanish lyrics as well. And so this is what the popular sound of Sami al-Maghribi was at the beginning of the 1950s.
اللونيرة انت شابة وصغيرة اسمك عزيز عليا في فم احلى من طميرة بربي عليك يا قميرة لا تخمم ولا تحير اجي عندي يا العميرة واللي صار يصير لونا اللونيرة انت شابة وصغيرة اسمك عزيز عليا في فم احلى من طميرة شعلتي في قلبي جميرة وخلتيني ممحون خليتي عقلي بحيرة بهادوك العيون اي لوني تكيت وانت شعرك حل في الاندلس زينك ما كانش اي لوني تكيت نقيت هذا العنبر مني تنبس فوق خدك الاسمر لونا لونيرة انتي شابة وصغيرة اسمك عزيز عليا في فم احلى من طميرة شعلتي في قلبي جميرة وخليتيني ممحون خليتي عقلي بحيرة بهادوك العيون Luna lunera, cascabelera, ve dile a mi chiquita por Dios que me quiera, dile que no vivo de...
So I had to fade out on the Spanish, unfortunately, but I think you get the point. Last couple pieces of music. This is a piece that Sami records, Sami al-Maghribi records in 1955, November 1955, in a Paris hotel room. This is a celebration of the Sultan, the Moroccan Sultan, who is now in the process of returning to Morocco from France at the end of 1955 to lead his country to independence, and Sami al-Maghribi is very much the voice of that. And so this is a recording written and music by Sami al-Maghribi on his own label, Samiphone, entitled Fi Eid Arshik Ya Sultan, on your throne day, O Sultan, and it's very much a piece of nationalist music that was quite popular in Morocco at the time.
اسطوانات ساميفون بمناسبة عيد عرش سيدي محمد الخامس ملك المغرب ناشد من نظم وتلحين سامي المغربي. في عيد عرشك يا سلطان الشعب يجدد التهاني كل مغربي اليوم فرحان يفرح قلبي وننشد ألحاني.
Here he's singing about the happiness of every Moroccan upon upon his return and ascendancy. So I want to end with this piece, sort of like a service. We've been hearing, of course, the Arabic language recordings, but as I mentioned, some of these recordings were made in Hebrew as well. This is Adon Olam, which will be familiar to many of you, recorded by Judah Sabag, who I didn't know much about until just a few days ago when his son got in touch with me. So there's lots to say about him. Born in the same city as Sami al-Maghribi a few years later. He will leave Morocco for Israel in the 1950s, but then go back to Morocco shortly thereafter, and then eventually return to Israel. And somewhere on the way, he lands in Marseille in southern France. He records for the Tom Tom label there. And what I couldn't hear before, but now I can hear thanks to his son's intervention, is that it was a very impromptu recording session. And so what you're going to hear is that while they couldn't get the right percussionist, someone's in fact playing the spoons to help lead this song to where it needs to be. So take a listen for that. So I'm gonna end it here. I'm just gonna let you know that if you like this music, if you want to hear more of it, if you're connected to it, you can find it on this website there. So I want to say thank you.
Thank you so much. It's not a competition, but you definitely win program with most questions. People are very engaged. I know you can't see it and you've been focusing on your presentation, but very engaged, a ton of questions, lots of interest, lots of people thanking you. So we'll get to a couple of these questions. Lots of people asking about, cultural context. I think it was during the first of Habib al-Musika's recording that someone asked, what's going on sociopolitically at the time?
Yeah, I mean, sociopolitically, there's much going on at the time. I mean, the most important context there is that all of North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia have been colonized by France, either from the beginning of the 19th century, like the case of Algeria, Tunisia since 1881, and Morocco since 1912. And so the interwar period is a moment in which the 1920s and 1930s is a moment when Moroccans, Tunisians, Algerians are agitating or beginning to agitate for some sort of independence from France. And they're often communicating, drawing inspiration from some of the parallel nationalist movements that are taking shape in places in the Middle East, whether it's Egypt or Syria or Iraq. And so we see the picking up of that music by figures like Habib al-Musika.
Another bit of questions was about the way, I think this is sort of perhaps the culture of music at the time, but how was this music circulating at the time between people? How was it radio or the live concerts? How were people finding out about different music and staying in touch with their artists? I suppose is kind of
so we have a recording industry already in the end of the 19th century. So before flat discs, we have cylinders that are being recorded in North Africa. Like I said earlier at the beginning of the program, hundreds of thousands of records are moving around. I didn't get a chance to talk about this, but they're largely distributed by a base of Jewish music purveyors as well. So either record stores as we might imagine them at the time, but also middlemen who are dispatching these records to sort of all corners of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. And we also have radio in the 1930s. Some of that music can be heard on radio if the French censor allows it. And so we also get some very interesting things, and this is part of another conversation, but where some of the Axis powers in the 1930s, Germany and Italy, will be playing music made by Jewish recording artists that the French have not allowed for on their own radio. So it's circulating in much the same way it does in other places.
And to be clear, it was being recorded in North Africa. It wasn't like artists weren't.
It's both.
Okay.
So there's recording that's happening in North Africa, but like the Masika disc, she travels to Berlin to record, and so sometimes they're recording in Germany, sometimes they're recording in France as well. So it really depends. It's sort of on the moment in time, the technological capability, the capability of the record label in question, and so both is the answer.
So there are some hugely, like, we need an hour just to answer some of these questions, but I'll touch on just a couple more that I think you could maybe get at it as quickly as you've been getting to these other ones. There's some questions about the Judeo-Arab language. Does it differ from the Arabic that's being spoken by other people in these countries?
So, we can think about Judeo-Arabic on a couple of levels. So one is as a written language in which it's sort of like the most appropriate. So this is the Arabic language written in Hebrew characters. Jews also speak, a Jewish variant of Arabic, Judeo-Arabic, that's intelligible to everybody else. So there are multiple dialects we should remember, regional particularities and things like that. There's nothing Judeo-Arabic about these records, I should say. So they're not, they're intended for both Jews and Muslims. Sometimes, in some cases, the particularities of the Jewish accent, okay, that was sort of common at the time, will come through on a recording. So sort of an astute listener would have been able to hear that, oh, this artist is Jewish and that one is Muslim. But for many, they would not necessarily have been able to tell, and would have just known that this was music that they liked or a song that they recognized. And so, yeah, I hope that answers that.
Sure. I'm seeing a couple of questions that touch on there's like identity politics, cultural identity, asking about contact with Ashkenazic Jews, if all the Jews in the region identify as Sephardic, and then a question about the word indigenous in the context of North Africa, one when it comes to Jews, and I think maybe perhaps a question of inclusivity of Berber culture. And so I'll just sort of throw that at you and see what you want to touch on from those couple of questions that I tried to aggregate.
Okay, let's see if I can remember this. Contact with Ashkenazi Jews. I mean, there are Ashkenazi Jews in North Africa at various moments in time and for various reasons. And so there is contact. And then in some cases, like specifically pertaining to music, when I was talking about some of the purveyors of music, or many of the major purveyors of music, those who are enabling its distribution, are Jews. What this sometimes means is that North African Jews who are representing major international labels like Pate or Gramophone or Odeon or whatever it is, in North Africa, are also interfacing with their Ashkenazi counterparts in France or in the UK or elsewhere. So that's just just sort of a specific example, but it's happening at various levels. The second question was about, remind me, I remember the third one was indigeneity.
I think it came from you talking about a bit indigenous Jews in the region, and I think you're differentiating at that point between Jews who came, from Spain versus Jews who were previously the region, I'm guessing, but then also acknowledging the Berber presence,
Yeah, so the reason I say that is also to I guess to emphasize sort of that these music makers are at least the ones I'm focusing on here are Arabophone or Arabic speaking, and they're of the region. So sort of, when you talk about Jews in music, I wanted to make sure that it was clear that we're talking about people who are from this place. The question of indigeneity becomes particularly complicated, and we probably don't have time to get into it, in the case of Algeria, because Jews are made French citizens. Most Jews are made French citizens. Algerian Jews are made French citizens in 1870. And of course, that citizenship will be revoked in 1940 by Vichy. What this means is that legally speaking, they're French. And so that comes with a whole set of complications, especially when we're talking about indigeneity, because they benefit, of course, from this legal status. But what's important, I think, in the turn to music is that we understand that sort of legal identity is one thing, but sort of the fidelity to their cultural milieu is something else. And we need remember that alongside that legal status, Jews were continuing not just to speak Arabic, but to sing in it, and sometimes to become stars in that language as well.
And this, of course, touches on the questions of nationalism and what these artists were perhaps singing about at significant historical moments, both, as you noted, locally, regionally, nationally, and beyond. I mean, and you started to get into a bit about French colonial political strategy, and there are questions about that, but we're way over time, and so I'm going to cut it there. I'll send you questions. Maybe we can get on some point and talk about a few more, and we could send some answers out. But I think there's a good place to cut, because there's a ton to talk about, and it's obviously of great interest to everybody who's been tuning in. Listen, on behalf of, obviously, of myself, but the National Museum of American Jewish History, Chris, thank you. Thanks for being here and presenting all this, and in a snap, the express version.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. It was a real pleasure. Thanks.
I've been looking forward, and I'll tell folks that there are a number of, aside from the Gramophone Records website and the Instagram, which is always fun to visit both of those, Chris has contributed and authored a number of articles which speak to the political context in the region in different moments in time, as well as the musicians and their roles. And some of the musicians today, you can read some of these articles, and it answers a lot of the questions that were asked. So I'll encourage folks to check that out, check those out, I should say. So then on going back to the museum, I want to just invite everyone again to support the free programming at Namaj, as we call ourselves, by donating. The arts and culture, obviously, we're not immune to financial troubles caused by the pandemic as much as anybody else is. So inviting you to donate if you can. The suggestion is $10. Link in the comments and chat section. Let you know all that at judaicashop.net, which is our museum store. You can use the code SILVER, as in Chris Silver, SILVER 17 to get a 10% discount. It's good through Friday the 19th. If you're a member, 1, thank you. 2, you can add it to your members discount for 20%. Thanks to my co-pilots in programs, which is Emily August, been behind the scenes taking questions and helping me in a lot of different ways, as well as our team at Brand New, Charlotte and Tess. Thanks to everybody who's tuned in. and asked questions and engaged. This is our bread and butter right now. It feels really good also personally to know that the things that make me really interesting, that it really interest me, are very interesting to so many other people. I hope we can all sort of continue talking about this stuff, both in program and off program. Certainly once we're back in the museum, we'll be having these conversations in person. And so with that said, Chris, anything else you want to add before we sign off?
No, just thank you again. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We'll have to talk about a follow-up sometime, and obviously the people want it, so we'll have to do that. So once again, to everyone, thank you. My name is Daniel Samuels. I'm the Public Programs Manager at the National Museum of American Jewish History, located on historic Independence Mall in Philadelphia. Call someone you care about to check in on them. Be kind to your neighbors, be kind to yourself, be safe, and have a great rest of your week. Thanks again for joining us.